What's going on, everyone? Coach Jason here,
Coach Patrick.
Coach RJ.
Coach Bobby.
and you are tuning into the Mach 1 method. Today, we are going to be discussing what building muscle the right way really looks like. Pat, the biceps are popping right now. Let's get you to get started.
All right. So, what does building muscle look like, guys? I think it's pretty much, come in, send it, eat, sleep, repeat, right? Like, it's pretty simple when you break it down.
Podcast over.
Done. Too easy.
Done.
But, when you want shapely biceps and, popping triceps, it takes a little bit of strategy. Yeah, like Chuck.
The brains of the operation.
Yeah, he's the utility player. Have a go and check. Anyway, so building muscle, I find what actually works for me now is just like keeping it simple. Going through, lifting weights. Making sure like my nutrition and my sleep is when it's low, my lifting actually is less, and when it's up, it's a little bit more. I kind of cook while the kettle's hot there, but we're just out here having fun, which is really what it comes down to. So, like, we can get into the science of it, but I think we should talk about our experiences.
Yeah, for me, like, I think my first time really trying to build muscle, I think back to I was like 18, 19 years old. I was just getting into personal training, and the gym I was training at was like a really bodybuilding heavy gym. And there was a lot of attention on that kind of stuff. And, obviously, like, the pressure of that bodybuilding environment, like, I wanted to build as much muscle as I could. And, I was first starting off, so I didn't really know much better. I started to get the most amount of results when I started prioritizing trend. Exactly. No, when I started actually powerlifting, like, I think thinking back on it now with what I know, like, not that I was like a skinny kid by any means, but I was just young, small, and I wasn't strong. So doing powerlifting was like the biggest gift for me in terms of building muscle. I wasn't doing such high reps. I was focusing on just building my strength, and I think that came back to me when I was doing like my accessory lifts, and I was just so much stronger. So now I was doing higher volume with more weight. It's not like I was doing high weight, high volume training at the same time. That doesn't really exist. It was just relatively higher with higher volume because I took some time and I got so much stronger. And I think that helped me like just overall put on like so much size. When I first started powerlifting, first 6 months, I put on, and obviously it's not going to be all muscle, but I put on 15 pounds, and like my chest was more filled. My back muscles were like much more like thick and defined. Like my arms, my shoulders were filling out, the sleeves better. Like the calves never grew, but we're still working on that. It's a never-ending process.
Some pickings out here.
They'll get there one day, Papa.
I'm trying really hard.
But yeah, I think that's how it was like for me.
Yeah, I think like Bill. I think I was like around like I was always training like more like athletically for like when I played lacrosse. So I was doing like youth performance, and like I started really getting into like just I mean those were fun days. Like I had a lot of fun training, but I think it was just more fun. Like I started like getting involved in bodybuilding probably like early college, late high school, where I was just like, man, I just like the feeling of like my muscles on fire. I like the sweat I get. I like that it's like hot out and I get to wear a tank top and I get to like, show off and like all that stuff. Like I really like the simplicity of like just going in, challenging myself, and then eating, recovering, getting out. And I think like the times where I've had the most luck gaining lean muscle, because I think some people like will put on muscle, but it comes at maybe like a cost of an extra pounds of body fat. But I think like the balance is like minimizing how much body fat you're getting, but also like still looking really sick. I think I had the best luck. I was just doing like the little small things right. I think like Coach Patrick was saying, like doing my nutrition, making sure I'm hitting my macros and your micros. I've been learning about more micros. So getting your micros in, eating your fruits, vegetables, water, and like not really making a big deal of such big deal things, I guess is like how I kind of perceived it, where it's like these are really heavy like things you need to be doing: your sleep, water, this. Like it all can be very like overwhelming at first, but then you kind of like zoom out and you're like, that's actually not really that bad. Like, just drink my Owala 4 times, like have an apple if I'm bored, like, like crush a steak when I'm like not full, like, no, no kidding, crush a steak like when like you're hungry, and like just having fun with like feeling good that you're doing the little things right. And I think like I power lift, obviously, so like I switch back and forth, obviously, but so like I like always switching back and forth because I feel like one could get little, like the more I get into like the bodybuilding of building muscle, the more I'll kind of, I miss being really strong, so I want to focus on strength. And then strength, I'm kind of like, wow, bodybuilding's a lot of fun because it's super lightweight and I don't feel like death every day. So it's like going back and forth is also kind of fun, and not making too much of a big deal of, you know, how I view myself. Because I think I remember that age, especially, you're always comparing yourself to like 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds on trend, and you're like 19, 18 years old, and you're like, well, why can't I look like that tomorrow? And you're like, I just forget like just having fun with it, So, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of have a same background in terms of like a performance background. So I've never really done any bodybuilding formally or anything of that nature. And the gyms that I've been part of are more like sports training. So we really weren't like specifically trying to like be in that bodybuilder mindset, but it is still important to build and grow muscle, because you're trying to get stronger, more powerful. So just like a little different lens. I think what like improve my strength and my muscle was truly like building, not coming to the gym, testing my 1RM every single week, trying to take it week to week, session to session, and build on what I was doing previously. And a big part was tracking. Just having like something, like I had a little notebook back then because there weren't really online trackers. And the one week I did, I don't know, just a 3x10, 50 pounds, and then next week either increase the reps, increase the weight, and building, week to week, session to session. That's truly what like stood out to me.
I think like building muscle also, like, we're talking about it in the lens of like, we're guys, we started lifting when we were in high school, like Bobby, you mentioned, like there's bodybuilding idols that we're looking up to, but like building muscle isn't just getting bigger. Maybe for some people that's the main focus, but building muscle is also, you know it's leaner body tissue than body fat. So building muscle can actually mean that you're slimming down in a sense, but you're getting more cut, you're getting more defined, like you're going through some body recomposition, you're losing fat. And I think like the effective ways to do that comes down to like kind of what you guys are saying, is like keeping your strength training simple and keeping your nutrition, consistent, like hitting your protein, hitting the appropriate amounts of like your micros and macronutrients, like your carbs, your fiber, and everything like that, balancing it out with just life. But building muscle isn't just getting the hugest. Building muscle, looks a lot different depending on what your goal is.
So, kind of talking about like my experience with it all as well. When I was in high school, I was kind of chasing that bodybuilding look, but it was also about just coming in, maxing out all the time, pushing the limits, chasing the pump. And also, it was like competitive nature. Like, it was like me and my best friend. That was like right after school, go to the gym and start like slinging weights, right? Yeah. And like we just out of creativity almost started doing CrossFit on accident before we knew what CrossFit was. And like we were just challenging ourselves, and we were doing like power cleans, and we were doing thrusters, and we were mixing in pull-ups and like supersets, and like we were doing all this crazy volume. And like my work capacity at that time was probably like through the roof. Probably one of the best shape I was ever in my life. It was like late high school, early college, just because I was training wrong in a way. I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and like building that tank. But after I kind of like went to college and I was doing exercise science and I was learning program design, and I was like seeing like I almost kept hitting these plateaus. Like I realized I was going through and like training wrong, but having that work capacity, having that big of a reserve tank where I can do strength training, where I can put on a little bit of muscle by giving myself proper rest times and like not maxing out every set. Like I started to see like extra results throughout college, and I was like comfortably sitting at like 8% body fat most of college without going out and like restricting myself. And I was eating at the dining facility, and like I was going out and hanging out at the basement parties on the weekends. Like I was doing that stuff while comfortably hanging out at like 8% because to me, I started listening to my body. I was eating a little bit more structured. I wasn't tracking macros, but I was getting my protein and I was giving myself rest periods and I was doing all those benefits. But I really didn't see a jump from college until I went to basic training because like that's where I wasn't lifting at all for like 8 weeks, right? Like I we were working out, we were running, we were doing push-ups, we were doing stuff like that, but like I had 10 minutes and I was force feeding myself meals and like they gave us like these protein bar. Yeah, exactly. That's literally what happened. And like I was one of the people that I left basic training heavier rather than lighter because I was force feeding myself as much volume as I can in the 10 minutes. And like I cut back on my strength training volume, but I was still like keeping maintenance through like the push-ups and the calisthenics and stuff like that.
Calories.
Exactly. Calories were up, and I was like just pumping the muscle rather than like trying to force a build. I went into tech school following basic training, and like that's when I saw the first jump in my bench press PR because like as an Olympic lifter, I wasn't benching or anything like that, but I made it a point when I graduated basic training, I wanted to hit a 350 PR on my bench, and like I did it the day I finished class, right? And I was just totally different training stimuli for like about 2 months before I went back into strength training and giving your body the fuel and the rest. Like it's a totally great way to like break through these plateaus as long as you're doing it in like a structured manner. So it's definitely a lot of opportunity to grow there.
I guess like you talked about like that's kind of like you touched on maybe 2 or 3 like pivotal moments where you're like realized you were doing something wrong and you made a switch and you got results. I kind of mentioned how that happened for me with like the switch from like a bodybuilding to a powerlifting focused or like a power building. Do you guys have like a moment that you can remember where you're like, oh, like why am I training like this? And then you switch something and you start getting the results that you were looking for?
Um, Actually, it was like probably like when I first started coaching with Coach Jason. Actually, I was like, I think like I was didn't realize how much like structure I was not on. I was just like, I was like, oh yeah, like I know what an AMRAP is. Let's hit it today. And then like the next day, I'd be like, oh yeah, I know what a max out is. Let's hit it or whatever. Like I was just like, my idea of powerlifting or that I wanted to get into because I was more like bodybuilding in college for fun. I was in a fraternity, so we're just trying to look big, move weight around, and just like be egos. And then I started getting really addicted to like weight training, and then that's when I like started really like messing up with my body a little bit, and I started like tweaking some things, and I'm like, oh, this is just part of the process. And then I was like, wait, no, this doesn't have to be part of the process. And then I reached out to Coach Jason, got me on a powerlifting program, and I was like, oh my god, like this is so much more like structured and like thought of, and just this was like above my league. What I thought was training was there was a whole different world that I stepped into, and I haven't left the world since. And, and I'm not going back. No, I'm not going back. Yeah, I think I was like pretty much when I just like made the call to reach out and be like, you know what, I need a coach and I just need guidance, and showed me the way.
Oh yeah.
Bang. Yeah, I think we kind of all alluded to it. For me, growing up, like there wasn't as much education and resources out, and in the beginning, I was doing like a lot of like high volume, high rep, low weight. I didn't want to get hurt for sports, and the turnaround was actually adding like more of the compound lifts, like you were saying. I wasn't probably truly powerlifting, but we added some deadlifts. We were doing some shrug pulls. We were doing cleans, and adding those lifts one made me better on the field, actually, like stronger, more powerful, but put on a little more size because I was getting that stimulus. And then, that kind of carries over. Recently, ACSM just put out their new guidelines, and they're saying that, people should be lifting 80% or heavier, more often than we think. Like it is recommended to do those compound lifts and do them often and keep them in the routine. So, the fact that, we're implementing it now, is going to help people, with all the sciencey, based stuff.
Yeah. And I feel, if they're listening to this conversation, they probably have some interest or background in fitness and they could probably relate to a lot of these points. But a lot of people can probably relate to the fact that we've all probably seen ourselves overtrained and underfueled, right? So, like, doing too much where we're exerting the body and we're not able to recover, I think is kind of the concept of we were able to overload the muscle. We were able to, pull back the volume per se in terms of like reps and sets, but really address like that muscle building stimuli. And then, we were high school, college kids. We were eating. We weren't really, I don't know if you were bodybuilding, so you were tracking, but like we were probably just eating pretty intuitively and letting our body ask us to feed it and to build it, and like that's where we saw like that muscle development. And like I think if we can really take anything away from this conversation, it's like trying to find balance. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, is like, what is right? Should I just dive in and max out my workout intensity and cut calories at the same time? Or do I back off my weightlifting a little bit and up my calories? Like, there's a lot of games we can play with that. But I think finding the balance is really where we all saw the success.
Yeah.
I feel like you mentioned something just now, and you mentioned something earlier that's like as like a major takeaway, because it's not like there's one secret to building muscle other than trend. For those who don't know, trend is a steroid. Don't do that.
The guy in the bathroom is doing COVID shots.
COVID shots.
Stay away from him.
They're not the FDA COVID shots. But you mentioned how like so again, the two things that I think are huge takeaways that you mentioned. One is you said it in the terms of like balance, but it fluctuates based on like where you're at. Like, are you in like a mass gaining phase? Are you in like a cutting phase? And regulating those calories based on your training has a huge impact. Like personally, like I talked about like first starting powerlifting, and like I was being a lot more mindful prior to that, like you said, like with bodybuilding, like trying to eat like really lean foods, and like you know not necessarily recommending this for everyone. I was 19, 20 years old. My younger body can handle this in a different way, but I started doing way more compound movements, like RJ you mentioned. I started to like feel a lot better, and like literally like post workout food was like chicken parm pizza, and it's like just like calorie surplus, and like I was getting protein, but I was just like fueling my body, right? Again, not saying that chicken parm pizza is the key to muscle, but it might be. But depending on what stage of muscle building you're in and your goals specifically, of course, like making sure that you're fluctuating like your cuts, your bulks, and your training volume to match that. Yeah.
I think something to touch on what Coach Jason said was like, from what I've experienced, what I've seen is like almost like trust your own progress, because I think like I've seen a lot of things online of people like who promote their like brands and are like, oh, well, your progress is actually wrong. You haven't been buying my app that actually tells you where your progress is right. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's like really it's like really good, and also to see like what works for you. And I think that took a lot of time to realize and really digest. Is like, where does my progress come from? Does it come from what someone else online is doing, or is it something that like maybe I and a coach have been working on and catering and making sure that it runs smoothly? And like I remember in college, I was so like obsessed with progress that I just always felt like there could be something better, even though like, I wasn't just okay with what I was doing, and I never was okay with what I was doing because I always thought had to be something better. And I just now that I'm like older, a little bit more like chill about like what I eat. I can eat, drink, go out with friends, and not really like want to like hurt myself over it or like punish myself and run a mile. We've heard people like say like, oh, I ate bad this weekend, I'm gonna run 30 miles tomorrow. And it's like, why, bro? Like it's like you don't have to do that. Like you might run the best 30 miles of your life, but like like, or you might not. It's a lot of miles. But I think like for me, like I'm personally one that like I always go back and forth with it, but I am very analytical with my tracking my calories. Like I need to know a number. I need to scale it. That's just me personally. But sometimes I'll fluctuate out of it depending on like what I'm in or like how life gets thrown at me. But I know for me that works. Some people I know kids I went to college with that can literally eat like McDonald's, like Domino's, Burger King every single day and still look jacked. And like that's just where it works for them. It's gonna hurt them when they're like older, but I don't know. I feel like that's just something I picked up on, was just like trust your progress and like talk to a coach, talk to a nutritionist, get in touch with somebody, and like maybe they can cater your own progress to you, and then you can take off from there.
Yeah, you really don't know what you don't know, right? So like going through and working with a trainer is a great way to make sure that you're getting your program reflected on and saying, am I doing the appropriate volume? Am I eating enough? Am I balancing it? And I, like we've been doing this for over a decade, right? So like I'm sure when we were 20 years old, we had a very different perspective on building muscle compared to what we do now. But on like the back nine of our career with this stuff, like we've had that experience, we've learned from those mistakes, and we've seen what worked for us, but more importantly, we've seen what works for our clients and our members, right? And when you work with such a wide range of people, like you're saying, like you might have to be super dialed in on your macros, where like for me, when we were in Texas for the American Open, like I was a few kilos over. I didn't even track a single calorie, but I knew where I needed to be weight wise, and I was able to manipulate that because of how in tune I know I can control my body. And like some people might need one, people can benefit from the other, but like when it comes to building muscle, and like the takeaway from all of it is, are we doing kind of what you're saying, like the balance, but like are we doing what we need for our individual body? Like the X's and O's are great, but like having a good coach that you can bounce off of, and I'm using the word good specifically because like you don't want to just get this online person who's selling you products and be like, oh, you need to hop on the cycle, and we're gonna put a little trend in your Pop Tarts, and like you're gonna be able to do whatever. But like, getting with a good trainer can really like set you up for success in that regard because of like, bless you.
Thank you.
Just because of kind of like like you get that audit, right? And a lot of people have a hard time coming out of maintenance, and putting muscle on does require adaptation and change. So I think kind of reflecting on all this is like we need to just essentially put on muscle with the way that's best for our body individually.
I feel like it's a good place to
Take notes, people.
call it there.
Mach one out.
Yeah, I guess. Quick recap. Quick recap. It sounds like I sound like bringing it all together in terms of building muscle. We can all agree on adding some resistance exercise in some
Compound
fashion,
lifts.
right? Hit some compound lifts.
Yeah.
Matching it with some nutritional advice.
Big
or,
facts. Hit your
coaching.
protein. Fill it with the proper carbs.
Your refuel in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
So you got your exercise, you got your nutrition, and then like building and staying consistent. I think those would be like 3 big buckets.
A little side note there of like exercise is catabolic, which means it's breaking muscle down, where muscle growth happens in the anabolic window, right? When we're recovering, when we're sleeping, when we're eating, when we're hydrating. So like no matter how hard you work out, if those buckets are not being addressed, like we're not anabolic, we're not building muscle. So I think that's the biggest takeaway, is remembering all the exercise is technically catabolic, where we're actually breaking the muscle down. So feed your body.
Yeah. I think if you touch on those 3 things, you're going to be in a good spot.
And sleep.
Touch them. Eat big, get big.
Boom.
That's it. Eat big, get big.
Touch them.
Mach 1 method.
Boom.
Boom.
Knock one out.
Boom.